Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you all today. My name is Chris Mah. I'm a doctoral student at Stanford, and I study writing in AI. And today, really happy to be with you and to think about those big questions. Today's workshop is based on a study that my team and I conducted back in the spring. It's called Tensions in Teachers and Students' Perception of Cheating and Learning with AI. Today is going to be hopefully very interactive. So to the extent that you can have your cameras on and stay close to your computers, there's going to be lots of opportunities for good discussion. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in. So I work really closely with teachers and school leaders all around the state and even some around the country to understand how teachers are thinking about, feeling about, and using AI. And there's a range of feelings, a range of things people are thinking about, but something we often hear are concerns about cheating. And this is especially true for writing teachers. So you've probably seen some news headlines like this: suspicion, cheating, and bans, AI hits America's schools. Professor catches student cheating with ChatGPT. I feel abject terror. We know people are sort of speculating the end of high school English. And then this is my favorite one, robots now doing homework for lazy students. And usually you get a chuckle with this last one, but there are some real problems with this type of framing and this type of really hyper focus just on the cheating component. So why is it problematic just to focus on this cheating component? Well, first, a lot of these assumptions about students cheating are often deficit based. Second, we know that students in this country in particular are subject to huge disparities in discipline based on race and gender. And then lastly, a lack of broader AI literacy may actually accelerate inequity if we just focus on cheating and banning the technology. Of course, there's limitations to that technology and huge risks, but by just focusing on cheating and trying to kind of enforce bans, we're not doing students any favors, and we're kind of papering over some larger issues that need to be addressed. So my team was really interested in, if teachers are so focused on cheating, what do they actually mean by cheating, and what do they actually think is learning with ChatGPT? So we asked two research questions. We said, what do teachers and students use to define learning about writing with ChatGPT? And then what criteria do they use to define cheating at writing with ChatGPT? So I'll talk a little bit about the study. We'll actually do some interactive activities, and then we'll come back and I'll show you some data from the study. So in our study, to kind of pursue these questions, we worked with two groups. We worked with a small group of high school students from linguistically and economically diverse public charter school. They ranged in grades from 9 to 12. And then we worked with 16 writing teachers from the Bay Area Writing Project. They taught everything from pre-K to adult ed. So we had a nice cross-section of teachers. What did we actually do? The main thing we did was a ranking activity, which you all are going to actually get a chance to do in just a moment. We recorded videos of paired and whole group discussions. We collected written explanations and Zoom chat transcripts to make sense of teachers and students' explanations. And then finally, we went through a pretty rigorous process of coding and analysis to come up with some findings that I'll show you after you've had a chance to do this activity in the group. Okay, so you're actually going to get a chance to do this activity that our study participants did. And so in order to do that, I'm going to put a link in the chat. And if you follow that link, you should be taken to give me a moment. Okay, if you put in the link in the chat, you should be prompted to make a copy of a document that looks like this. And in a moment, I'm going to put you in a breakout group with a few other people. And your task is going to be a couple things. The Google Doc that you'll have has 4 different examples of how a student could use a tool like ChatGPT to help them write. So it's not loading here, but there's 4 separate examples. And with your partners, with your small group, you're going to read the examples. And then you're going to discuss with your partner, how much did you think each student learned and how much did you think they cheated about writing? Okay. And then the last step is you're going to rank them in order of how much you think each student learned and how much you think each student cheated. So I'm going to put the instructions in the chat so that you'll have them in your breakout rooms. So again, the instructions are read through the examples, discuss it with your partners, and then rank in order of how much you think each student learned and cheated. Okay. Are there any questions about the instructions? Okay, then I'm going to create some breakout rooms and we'll take maybe 8 minutes in the breakout rooms to discuss and to rank, and then we'll come back together and discuss as a big group. All right, breakout rooms should be open. Go ahead and join your breakout rooms and we'll come back a little before 4:20. All right, is everybody back? I can't quite tell. Yes, we are. Okay.
Raise your hand if you're not here.
We're all back. I popped into a couple rooms. Sounds like there were some. Oh, that's the wrong window. You don't need to see my Gmail. I popped into some rooms. It sounded like there was a lot of good discussion going on. So as soon as I can get my screen up, I would love to hear your thoughts. So first, let's just do a quick poll to see how everybody ranked. And please share in the chat how you individually ranked. So even if you didn't agree with your whole group, we'll start with learning. So in the chat, go ahead and put which student do you think learned the most? So A is the kid with the first sentences, B the outline, C fix the paragraph, and D counter arguments. Go ahead and put in the chat, just put the letter, which kid learned the most? Your own personal ranking. We got B's and D's. So lots of B's and D's. I'm really curious to see if we'll see any of the A's or C's. Okay, we got a C. Okay. We chose not to rank. We don't know the student's backstory. Okay, so we're getting a range, mostly B's and mostly B's and D's, but a couple of C's now, and then some outlier answers too. So I'm going to encourage people to come off of mute and to continue writing in the chat. Let's just hear what came up for you. How did you make your rankings? What were some of the tensions? What came up?
I can speak for my group, Chris. One of the things that was super interesting, there were three of us, one who was a first grade teacher, one who was a sixth grade teacher, and myself who was a high school teacher. So we had very different perspectives on writing in general because first graders are learning how to write, whereas by the time I get them, they are writing beautiful 10,000 word essays, right? So we just looked at what was structural. So for instance, we all consensus was that B was the least cheating, if that makes sense, because it was almost like an organizational tool. And someone compared it to like a grammar. Oh, no, that was the other paragraph. But it was more of an organizational tool. It wasn't an idea or content tool. And so then we just kind of went through and thought about what are the pieces where the student was using their own analytical thinking or where it was having the generative AI do it for them.
Yeah, that comes up a lot when we do this activity. And I think a really interesting question to ask is whether we're thinking of how do we think about the role of organization in writing? I think some teachers think it's a crucial part of writing, and others think of it more as, like you said, a structural piece. Others, let's hear a couple other voices. What came up in your groups? There's some interesting stuff going on in the chat too. So please come up and share if you want.
We were the ones who chose not to rank. we rebelled. We saw well, I'll speak from my perspective, although I didn't get much pushback from my partners. We saw value in all of the examples. In other words, a learning opportunity and possibilities in all of the examples, and deep flaws in all of the examples from a learning standpoint. It depends on what the student did with it or what they brought to it to begin with. Like for example, I can't remember which one it was, the paragraph that the student wanted ChatGPT to correct. The student clearly wasn't equipped to evaluate the output for accuracy. They just had to trust it because they wouldn't have written that paragraph the way they did if they did have the knowledge to evaluate it. The organizational one, it's very valuable, but it depends on what the student did with that outline. So,
Yeah, and so I heard you say there was an opportunity for learning in each of those, and then
right,
I would finish that by saying there was also an opportunity for cheating in each of those. Let's get maybe two
right.
more. Let's get maybe two more comments. What else came up for you? I see Jim's hand.
So, our group again spanned, lots of different grades. I'm a high school mechatronics teacher, so I teach engineering. We use ChatGPT and large language models like all the time for code and all kinds of things. And so I actually, say, hey, is it really cheating? Right? There may be not learning going on, but I don't know if we really should label it as cheating unless we can really articulate what that cheating is. Now, in my class, the way that I let students use ChatGPT is I'll let them use it as a starting point. A lot of times we'll have an article that I want to have them read. And when they go write stuff, they could cut and paste stuff from the article and put it into ChatGPT and have them re-summarize it or whatever. But I structure what I want them to write about is, why did you find this article interesting? Uh, how will this technology affect your family, your community, your neighborhood, and will it make the world better? And so I'm actually making them kind of internalize it and how do they feel, so that that's not really fact-based stuff that they can just like have ChatGPT puke out. But I can tell if they've really looked at the article and read the article and kind of absorbed kind of, how is this good? Is this bad? Is this new, is this new GPU from NVIDIA, going to change the world? And why is it cool? Or are these robots interesting or whatever? Because I'm making it personal to them. I'm also on team, let's teach students how to use a tool. And because like I told our group, it's like, when you're out in a real world, in a real job, your boss is never going to come and say, hey, I want you to, generate this report and do the summary of this thing, but do not go out to ChatGPT, or do not go out to, Google to Google anything. Do not go to Stack Overflow to like look for a code example, right? Do not do that. Only do it with the knowledge that's in your head. And so we just have to teach these kids how to use these tools, so that they don't feel like, oh, if I use it, I'm cheating. It's like, no, if I use it, I'm learning,
Yeah.
and just teach them how to do that. I don't know. It's tough. It's crazy, right?
There was a lot in there. One piece that I want to kind of pick up on is Mark sort of introduced this idea of like it really depends on like what the student does. I think you're also introducing a second idea of like what the teacher is intending. And Renee, I know you put this in the chat, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought you made a really great comment about what's the goal. Could you
Yeah.
just speak a little bit more
Yeah,
about
I'm
that?
happy to talk about it because I also had another thought as he was talking. I think one of the hardest things is obviously writing is a complex task. So there's organizing ideas, there's coming up with your ideas, actually making an argument, there's choosing better word choice, which forever we've had maybe support in that if they want to look something up and get a better word. So it's kind of, for me, it was a great example of the complexity and how it really depends on what we're teaching and emphasizing. It kind of makes me think that we need to look at what is the goal of our teaching, like what is the learning target, so that I think the learning would be proof if anybody turned these into me and I could say to them, tell me about this word choice that you've now changed, or tell me about this, or if they can explain and understand what they've used this tool to accomplish, then I'm cool with it. If they can't, and I just was talking, I teach middle school, so that they're a little bit young, but I said, if you say I'll use the loquacious because that came up in our group, a very loquacious thesis, and you have no idea what those words mean, so the student's ability to share understanding is where the learning is. And I don't know that I can get it from these different examples easily. It maybe isn't We need to think of a more creative way so that they also understand. And they got it when I said, if I say, what does this mean about this character analysis? And you have no idea. They all kind of did a little cringe because they know, oh yeah, that's what cheating feels like when you have no, when you're just making something else think for you. So those are a few of my little thoughts on it. It's very tricky.
Great points. Great points, everybody. Well, you basically did my job for me because most of what you brought up was what's on the key takeaway slides at the very end. So you've anticipated a lot of sort of the big issues that are coming up. One thing that I wanted to also mention before we moved on to look at some data was I think I heard a couple elementary teachers in some of the rooms saying, hey, how does this apply to my first or second graders? And hopefully we'll get to that in just a moment. But I just want to prime you about thinking what are the types of writing that we're preparing our current first and second graders for? What's the future of writing that we're preparing them for? And even if your students are just writing at the sentence level right now, we have to start shifting the way that we think about the purpose of writing and the types of writing that kids will need to do in an era where machines can write in basically any genre. And so I'll touch on that as we kind of move towards the end. Okay. Okay. If you've got other thoughts about the activity, any other thoughts about that came up from what somebody else said, feel free to put them in the chat. But I do want to show you some data and show you kind of what some of the other groups we've worked with have said. Okay. Okay. So in this study, our participants did exactly what you just did, and I'm just going to show you some findings to help you kind of contextualize the discussion you just had with what others have said. Okay. So our first finding was that the teachers and students we did this activity with had really similar opinions about learning. So here you'll kind of see the distribution. And this is very interesting because you'll notice the majority / plurality of the teachers and students that we worked with in the study, they actually thought that student A, who asked for first sentences, actually learned the most. And that nobody in this group thought that. Okay. So here's a couple comments or a couple quotes that we heard. So one student said, just asking about the beginning, that leaves a lot more space for the writer to do the thinking and like the writing and composition. So this student's basically saying, if you're just asking for the first couple sentences, the student is doing more of the cognitive work because they're doing more, literally in a quantitative sense, more of the writing along the way. Teacher said, student A learned how to create a good hook, which is crucial to a good essay. So this teacher kind of assumed, to Mark's point, that the student took these sentences and maybe read through them, critiqued them, maybe revised them, made a choice. And so that could facilitate learning. On the flip side, only one teacher thought that the student D, who asked for counter arguments, only one teacher thought that kid learned the most. So one teacher in kind of rationalizing why this was not a good learning use case said, we could theoretically use ChatGPT as a source of counter arguments, but why don't we just have students read counter arguments in actual published writing? Why don't we just promote disagreement amongst members of the classroom community as a source of counter arguments? So things got a little bit messier when we went to cheating. Students and teachers had more variance in their opinions. So a couple things jump out. One is over here on the right-hand side. Nearly half the kids thought that the counter argument prompt was the most cheating. None of the teachers did. Another thing to note is that while just about half of the teachers thought that the first sentences kid learned the most, the other half thought that that kid cheated the most. So lots of disagreement depending on how they interpreted the situation. So the teacher that thought, one teacher that thought that this kid cheated the most, the first sentences, said student A cheated the second most because ChatGPT wrote their first few sentences for them, so implying that it's plagiarism. A kid said, I think this is cheating because it's like you're getting words from something else and using it as your own. And then on the flip side of this, for the counter arguments, one of the students thought that the counter argument kid was cheating and said, I can see why this would be seen as cheating. It's not their own thinking. And none of the teachers thought that the counter arguments kid cheated the most. And here was one of the reasons that one teacher thought it wasn't cheating. This teacher said, it's such a common thing a fifth grade teacher would do. Give them a beginning list of arguments, counter arguments, and then maybe build on it. It didn't feel very different that AI did it versus the teacher. So there were a lot of differences both between groups and within groups. We kind of boiled down these differences to 4 recurring tensions, some of which you've already brought up in discussion. So the first tension was this tension between using ChatGPT as a shortcut versus using it as a scaffold. So here's a quote from a teacher that kind of captures this. The teacher said, the student asked ChatGPT to provide counter arguments. On the one hand, that actually is forcing the student to think of arguments or rebuttals to the counter argument, which is learning, right? But if that student then copies and pastes the counter argument from ChatGPT into their essay and doesn't acknowledge where the counter argument is coming from, or tries to pass it off as a hypothetical counter argument that their own brain thought of, then it becomes cheating. The second tension was the tension between using GPT to produce ideas versus to produce specific sentences in specific language. So one teacher captured this by saying, I think the question is, what do we consider to be more cheaty? Is it taking someone else's ideas or taking someone else's words or language? Which I don't really know the answer to. I'm more inclined to have kids come up with their own ideas, but then sometimes you need to give them an idea as a scaffold. The third tension was kind of like a comparison. So teachers and students both kind of compared getting support from ChatGPT to getting the same type of support from other sources. And this was a way of them kind of measuring or gauging how much learning or cheating was happening. So I showed you that teacher comment before about, hey, in a normal classroom, this is something teachers do all the time, is give their kids lists of arguments and counter arguments. But kids also, and teachers also kind of compared this to other digital resources or technological resources. So one kid said, this is kind of like how you have Grammarly. It's kind of like that, but using ChatGPT. And then the last tension was a tension between learning from ChatGPT and learning without assistance from ChatGPT. So this kid said, this only came up in the students. One student said, I think it's mainly like thinking for yourself, building your problem solving skills, because I think it'll make you learn more if you learn it yourself instead of using a tool. And we thought that was a really provocative statement, this idea that you learn better without tools. I think Jim even brought up, like, we use tools all the time when we work. And so there's this tension between when is it appropriate to use a tool and when is it not? Okay, so why does this all matter? So initially, when teachers were really worried that there would be this huge spike in cheating, a couple of Stanford professors conducted this study. They looked at cheating rates, reported cheating rates, ranging back 6 or 7 years. The long and short of it was there was no big spike pre and post ChatGPT. The long and short of it is that students have always reported high rates of their own cheating, and those rates haven't really changed much. And so why does that matter? Well, it matters for a bunch of reasons, and this is one of them. This is a table from New York Times study. It's showing how many teens have never heard of ChatGPT. So just take a moment, just look at it, and then if you see anything weird, just go ahead and put it in the chat. So what pops out to you on this table? I'm going to use my teacher wait time just a moment longer, but if there's any patterns that pop out to you, just put it in the chat. Yeah, the income distribution really pops out to me too. The long and short of it is, this is old data. It's a year old, which in AI time is like dog years. But yes, there's big income disparities, where lower income students are less likely to have heard of ChatGPT. Higher income students are much more likely to have heard of it. This data has changed quite a bit in the last year. Now more and more students across this income distribution have heard of and are increasingly using ChatGPT. I think one of the arguments I'm trying to make is that just because access to the tool, it's a free tool. So just because access is free and everyone has quote unquote access to it, all kids are not having the same experience with it. Some kids are learning how to use these tools to optimize their learning, and other kids are being left to their own devices. And these tools make it really, really easy to shortcut the learning without smart coaching. Okay. I'll give you a quick example of this. So I do professional learning around AI literacy with schools and districts around the area. And a couple months ago, I was facilitating in Oakland Unified School District, and I had to do it from a coffee shop because their district had banned the use of ChatGPT from their network. A couple weeks later, I was down in the peninsula, which is a much wealthier area, a much more affluent area. And those school leaders were really invested in trying to train up their staff to teach students how to use the tools in ways that were productive. And so this is kind of the world that we don't want. We don't want to see sort of this world where some students are getting AI literacy skills and development and others are getting bans and punishment. Okay, so why does this matter? I'm going to make a couple arguments here and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So one is I no longer believe we can sort of police our way to AI proof assessment. If you'd asked me maybe a year ago, I would maybe have some suggestions around like how writing assessment can be kind of AI resistant. I no longer think that's really possible as AI gets better and better at lots of different types of writing. So the next thing is I would argue we shouldn't necessarily police our way to AI proof writing, and that we actually need to be fundamentally rethinking what we assign, the types of writing we assign, and why we assign them. So that brings us to the question, what can or what should we do instead? I know we have only a very, very, very short time together left today, but I'm going to have you grapple with this question one more time in small groups, and then we'll try to wrap up after that. I'm going to send you a link in just a second or share a link with you. Everyone should have access to this. Oh, hang on. So one more link for you. I'm going to put you in breakout groups one more time. And let me just make sure. Okay. So everybody should have access to it. When you open the Google Slides, you're going to see every single one of these is identical. So before you mess with the slides or anything, what we're going to do in small groups is you're going to read through in the notes, you're going to read through 7 different types of writing assessment around literary interpretation. They're all going to be roughly the same goal, literary symbolism and interpretation, but they're going to be framed slightly differently, okay? Your job is to sort those assessments along 2 axes. One is from the lowest rigor to the highest rigor, and then the other is from lowest motivation to highest motivation. So if you think 5-paragraph essay is high rigor, but low motivation, and when I say low motivation, I mean for students. Are students motivated to do this or not? So if you think 5-paragraph essay is very rigorous, but students maybe aren't that motivated to do it, you put it down in this quadrant, okay? So I'm going to put you in some small groups. We'll just take a few short minutes to talk through this just to get the exercise of thinking through it in your brain, and then we'll come back together and do a brief discussion, okay? When you get your breakout room, just take the slide that matches the number of your breakout room. We'll take 4 minutes to do this, and then we'll come back. All right, I'm gonna stay here this time and just get prepped for the last part.
I don't know if they're gonna get through all 7 of those.
Definitely.
Seems like they're
Yeah,
in
definitely.
that.
I just want them
Seems
to
like they're on number 3.
I just want them to have just enough conversation that they can kind of like get the process a little bit. So I can bring them back in 1 or 2 minutes.
It's an interesting thing to do, though. I already see some disparities. Very interesting interpretation of this.
That's what so many perspectives and angles you can look at it from.
Okay, I'm gonna close the room, so we'll be back in 1 minute.
She's learning about AI too.
No, she's complaining because she's not
Uh,
getting all the attention.
oh yeah.
I was trying to show her all the people.
So much for that.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Hope that was a good discussion for you all. One piece of context that I forgot to add here was all of the assessments that I listed. Those were actual assessments that teacher candidates, teachers in training that I've worked with have done in the past. Not all around Great Gatsby, but just kind of adapted to have the same topic. Okay, so I'd love to just hear a little bit about what came up, and then I want to just kind of tie it back to the original question. So please come off mute, put in the chat, just what came up as you were talking through those examples.
Just from a this session standpoint, we were into it. We definitely dove right into this. We loved it.
What were some of the things that people were excited to talk about?
No, I mean, just the whole idea of looking at these things and examining them was engaging to me, and it seemed to the other 2 members of my group.
Glad to hear that. Where was there disagreement in your groups, or any other comment? But where was there disagreement?
As a non-writing teacher, it was interesting, like thinking about the rigor of a 5-paragraph essay and thinking about, yeah, that died. Just because, and thinking about it, all of these in the context of utilizing artificial intelligence. You can have an AI spit, like ChatGPT, spit out a 5-paragraph essay without even batting an eyelash. But a lot of the other prompts really encourage students to internalize concepts a lot more deeply and reflect on them.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of underscore that point that ChatGPT could have done any of those assignments, but kids would have been more likely to use ChatGPT on some of them than others. Okay.
Yeah,
I think they would have wanted to put their own brains on this, and that's the secret sauce.
And I know this was very sort of language arts teacher focused, but writing belongs in all disciplines, and so I think there's definitely a social studies version of this. There's probably a science version of this. And then in math, I think there's a whole separate kind of conversation around using writing to think that is super, super applicable in math. So I think, you all are bringing up the right types of questions, raising the right types of questions. Yeah. Okay, let's get maybe one more comment. What came up as you were ranking and sorting these?
So, Chris, I wanted to share something, an epiphany I had as I was listening to all of you comment. The activities that we looked at that were engaging, motivating, had a connection to the student, and I think that's what is really key to just writing assessments in general. And if you want to motivate writers to write, regardless of whether they're using AI or not, um, the assessments that we felt that were really motivating, we would want to write. So I think having that as an assessment, I think would really make the student want to respond in their own authentic way. So that takes away from, I mean, it solves a lot of problems, really. It solves building the culture and community in your classroom, allowing you as the teacher um, to get to know your students a little bit better. And then when they respond, they're proud of their work. It builds in that, it builds in that empowerment.
That's right. And so you mentioned that, those types of writing that connect to personal life are more motivating to students. I would also argue that if you frame it correctly, they're also more rigorous, because now we're asking students to apply knowledge of a text to their own life, as opposed to just, analyzing a text. So for no reason. So I think the main takeaway with this particular activity is often we live in this world where we think, a 5-paragraph essay or a multi-page report is very rigorous, but students don't see the connection. They don't find it motivating. I think the trick in the age of AI is, how do we maintain this rigor while also bumping up that motivation scale? How do we redesign the assessment so that we're still focusing on, rigorous goals, but we're framing them in such a way that students see the connection and actually want to do the work, as opposed to using a tool to bypass it. Okay. So there's a lot more we could talk about. Obviously, this is just scratching the surface, but there's a couple big takeaways that I want you all to leave with today, and then I'll wrap up with some, happy to take some questions. So one, thinking back to that cheating and learning activity, educators and students really should be dialoguing about and co-constructing norms around AI use. So if teachers and students have different ideas about what it means to cheat or to learn with AI, that's a big, big problem. So one concrete thing you can do in your classroom, like next week, is you could actually use that activity we did today with your students. You'll be really interested. I think you'll find some interesting things that they share. But you can feel free to take that activity and just use it with your kids. At the very least, it will spark really good discussion about, like, what does it actually mean to learn how to write. Second, this came up in Renee's comments, but the fact that AI can do all this stuff, and the fact that it's sort of ambiguous about whether or not it's appropriate or not to use AI for this use case or other, that really underscores this point that it's twice as important now for teachers to be intentional and transparent about the learning goals. So if your goal is to help students, organize their thoughts into paragraphs, then maybe they should not be using AI to write an outline. But if the goal of your assignment is maybe thinking about word choice and strong topic sentences, then maybe it's perfectly fine for them to use a super, super basic outline that helps them kind of do some of the pre-thinking with the organization. And then lastly, rather than policing AI and trying to, trying to identify every time a kid has used AI, what we should really be thinking about is, how do we strive for high motivation, high rigor assessments? If we can do that, then we're more likely to motivate students to actually do the work, as opposed to using these tools to shortcut. And then lastly, I always talk about this one, process over product. AI makes it really important that we're trying to build in structures that allow us to see kids' thinking process and not just the final product. A lot of teachers want to go back to timed paper, pencil blue books, and I think that's the wrong direction, because that hides the entire learning process from the teacher. We have no formative assessment along the way. I really believe that the days of, here's a writing assignment, go home and do it and then turn it in, those days should be over. And that's not the right approach to writing, even before AI. So I think the bigger question for us is, how do we design our instruction so that we see kids thinking and make kids thinking visible along the process, and not just for the final product? So these are just 4 big takeaways that I want to leave you with today. I hope that you'll take some of this into the classroom and kind of and that it will kind of give you a different perspective on how you approach talking about AI with your students. And with that, I think there's a couple minutes left. We can take some questions. And Anu, I see your chat. I will get you the slides in just a second.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry, I don't have my video on. Heck. Yeah, something I've been really grappling with. I think we need to just, I think we need to move away from traditional essay writing. I'm not sure what value it has in today's society. And quite frankly, the books that we still have to teach, it's really easy because a lot of them are in the public domain, and it's so easy to have ChatGPT generate, those responses for you. I think the challenge that we all face is it within the context of something that is learning and getting smarter, is that trying to create high rigor and high motivation assessments. Like we have to keep going and outpace and get better there too. And I think that's where we really need, community and each other to help each other out, because it's too much work for one person to do, particularly when, it's constant. Like I feel like we're constantly behind. The kids know so much more than we do. And I agree with you, Chris, and what you were saying about like, there is zero value, and I think other people in this group were saying it too, of the Trinidans of the world, or trying to like determine the amount of AI utilized, because there are tools to outsmart that, and there are tools to make things sound like a kid, like where you can write it in their authentic voice. And so, I feel like it's really hard for us to detect.
And we have a lot of good research out there that suggests those detection tools are not reliable too. So that's another reason why, and I think this kind of ties back to that earlier point too, around which are the kids that are, getting punished for using AI. There's some research out there that suggests English language learners are more negatively impacted by AI detection tools than native English speakers. So we have to think about this through an equity lens too. But I empathize with your point around the challenge of trying to keep up. This is where I think school leaders play an important role. I work with, do a lot of work in professional learning and teacher education, and I think those are really high leverage places that we can do some of that work that you mentioned of trying to stay ahead. Okay, well, I shared some of the links with Anu, not just for the slides, but also for the original study. I'm happy to connect with people individually offline if you have follow-up questions, but appreciate you all today for being present and engaged late on a weekday. And yeah, hope to work with and see some of you again soon.
Thank you so much.
That was amazing. And you can tell you're a teacher. Oh my gosh, interactive, great.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Question for SCOE leadership, just housekeeping question. On slide 5 about closing and next steps, do we, if we're here, do we need to re-register?
No, you're already registered for all the sessions. That's just if you want to share it with your colleagues, you can give them that link.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, Anu, I actually have to go back to a class in just a moment. Is there
Okay, sure. So thank you so
for-
much, Chris, for coming and our
for
next,
inviting me.
and we really enjoyed what you brought up and the questions and such debatable, interesting topics. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. And the participation in the breakout rooms was just awesome. So this was a really great session. I wish it was longer. But have a wonderful evening, and we will send out the recording and the resources, the slides. So thanks for joining us.
Yes, and we have our next one on March 4th, and our amazing presenter is Elisa Melissina. She will be talking about AI and education benefits, challenges, and best practices. So looking forward to see you all. Thank you.